So welcome you all to our webinar today. This is brought to you by UGN Consulting Services. We're a consulting firm, and we're into accounting, tax, and management consulting. And this webinar is part of our ethics and values in the boardroom series that we use to promote good governance and ethics in governance. So previously, some time back this year, we had an episode on the effective board, and we're happy to let you know that this is actually our 7th episode. And we are very happy to have very distinguished guests that will be taking us through and we'll be having a conversation. This one is going to be a conversation, but just for background, there'll be just a little change of plan. I'm going to just do some little introductions before we dive into the conversation. My name is Obichukwu Azota, and I'm the managing consultant in UGN Consulting Services. So I'll be more like the moderator of this session. But let me just go through a quick introduction of our agenda. So this webinar is more of a conversation, and the topic is board dynamics for effective corporate governance. So we have session for questions and answers, but as we progress, if you have any question, you can drop it on the comment box, and we'll try as much as possible to address the questions given the time we have. But there'll still be a time dedicated towards the end for question and answers. So you can also take your questions there. So board dynamics for effective corporate governance. So you, as board of directors or someone that wants to join the board, because we have, based on the registration we had, we have a diverse mix of people that want potential board members, people that like to join, and people that are already board members, non-executive board members and executive. So we know that the remit of the board is corporate governance. And corporate governance is not just a science, neither is it just an art. So because when you see what happens in real life, in practice, you see that there are a lot of companies that have all their boxes checked, all the corporate governance principles and rules checked. But when you see the performance of the board, and more especially the performance of the company, you'll now be wondering what went wrong. Then you see also some boards that have excellent board members, as it were. Maybe not all, but some excellent board members, as it were. But when you see how the board has been functioning and the performance of the board, you begin to wonder what's the problem. And that's where we come to board dynamics. What are the forces driving the workings of the board? What are the forces that drive these workings of the board? These are what I call board dynamics. And that is what we're going to look at today. So it's no longer about the science or the structures of board corporate governance. It's no longer about the art. Okay, I have the talent, I have the competencies. But it's about the interactions and behaviors of everything that drives board performance and corporate governance. How do we bring it all together to get the desired effect? And to do this, to help us with this without taking much of our time, I would like to introduce our special guests that will be joining me in this conversation. I'm very, very delighted to have them. To introduce our special guests, we have David Wray. David held finance executive roles in technology industry for over 25 years. He holds a master's degree and is a chartered accountant with the CPA and ACA. David is the president of DW Group and DFCG International Group and sits on the board of directors for the International CFO Alliance and chairs its technical accounting working groups. He is also an AISBA board member and a member of several not-for-profit organizations focusing on data management, ethics, and sustainability. David is passionate about people. He is passionate about people and he coaches senior leaders and emerging talents and, and mentors students on career development. He has published several articles on leadership, sustainability, financial reporting, the future of finance, and is the author of the Amazon best-selling book, The Power of Potential, a straightforward method for mastering skills from personal to professional. Please join me make welcome Mr. David Wray. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It'll be my pleasure.
Okay, so I also want to, David is an iconic thought leader, and I also want to make welcome a very legendary personality, Dr. Iheanyi, Anyahara. So he has a very huge profile, just like David, but I'm going to summarize it. And if you'd like to reach out to them, you can get their contacts on LinkedIn and follow them. So Dr. Anyahara is a renowned expert in financial reporting, accounting standards, sustainability reporting, and regulatory practices with over 30 years of extensive experience in the field. He is a former coordinating director and head of the Directorate of Accounting Standards, Public and Private Sectors, and Sustainability Reporting at the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria. He is currently the CEO of Regulatory Compliance Readiness Advisors Limited. His influence extends internationally, with recent appointments in January as a technical advisor at the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, and his involvement with the International Assurance and Accounting Standards Board and the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants in their Stakeholder Advisory Council. Dr. Anyahara holds a first-class honors degree and an MSc, an MBA, and a PhD in accounting. He's a member of various institutes, including Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria and Association of National Accountants of Nigeria and the Association of Forensic Accounting Research. Join me, make welcome Dr. Anyahara. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you all. And I apologize again for the glitch in technology. I pray it won't happen again. So we are going to dive into our conversation today. And like I said, if you have any question, just drop it on the chat. And you can also wait towards the end when we have the question and answer. So we'll start by with David. If you can just give us your thoughts on board dynamics and its importance with effective corporate governance.
It's a great question. And I think, when it comes down to it, the importance of board dynamics, frankly, is everything. It's the difference between organizations that succeed and organizations that either struggle or fail. And that's because the dynamic of the board, helps provide a stabilizing effect as well. It counters, if you will, to some degree, what organizations can and do. And they serve, therefore, an important role in being almost that consciousness, if you will, because executives of companies quite rightly get very excited about strategy, direction, and everything that comes with it. And sometimes you get caught up in the moment and you focus more on the strategy than anything else. And the board provides that reflection or that mirror to talk through, okay, great idea. However, let's think about A, B, C, D. So I think the dynamics in the board from that perspective to be able to provide that kind of dynamic approach and that kind of reflection is important. And therefore, the board needs to get along really well. They need to complement each other. They need to be able to challenge each other and raise the board. So as an opening gambit, I would say that's the reason from my perspective that it's so super important to look at this. And, I'm sure that Iheanyi has other views and different perspectives, which are equally, I think, dynamic and interesting. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, David, for that wonderful introduction. For me, I welcome the audience, and I see the board dynamics as the invisible force in corporate governance. It explains the whole course, the structure. Yeah, they're there. But what really determines board effectiveness is the unseen, what I call unseen chemistry of how directors interact, communicate, and make decisions together. That bonding, that togetherness, having a focus on the objectives of the organization rather than personal interest. So that coming together, that bond for me is what I regard as the invisible force that makes corporate governance work very well. Probably we'll go further to talk about what really is board dynamics, and it goes beyond, like I said, formal rules. Of course, it looks at, yes, the rules, the handbook, they are there, but the way members engage determines the way an organization moves. Let me hang on here because this is just the intro. We'll get into it. Thanks.
Okay, so I like what you said, the unseen chemistry, and David also said how the board members get. Are your thoughts on the factors that help to shape this relationship, unseen chemistry?
It's a really great question. And honestly, I think it speaks a little bit to the unspoken chemistry that was just alluded to. There are a few things. So I think just starting off, and I'll speak very candidly because I think hopefully that's more helpful. It's starting with a level of maturity. So everyone on the board has to have a level of maturity to be able to talk about tough issues and to be able to confront tough issues. This is not a role where you can hide behind a reluctance to confront a problem. You have to get very comfortable with having these conversations, and that takes maturity. It takes self-awareness, and it takes a level of comfort in understanding one's position. But also, and I would say more importantly, is a willingness to listen to other individuals on the board. And there was an expression that was conveyed to me. I'll share it with all of you many, many years ago now, at the beginning of my career, so many moons ago. And the individual said to me, when I first became a leader in the finance function in enterprise, they said to me, David, leaders or individuals, but in this case, we were talking about leaders have two ears and one mouth. One should always listen twice as much as one speaks. And that was a really important lesson to make sure that when it comes to dynamics and human relationships, it's really important to understand where the other person is coming from. And that's a significant part to why boards either work well or don't work well. Because if everyone's trying to speak over each other because they lack that self-awareness, they lack that maturity or that self-confidence, and that ability to just listen and absorb and reflect on what's said, the board dynamic can deteriorate very, very quickly, where you've got competition that sets in and you've got some unhealthy attributes and behaviors. Whereas if an individual can listen and really understand and say, oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, because we all need to remember that all of us, every single person on this call, every single person that's going to listen to this later, we all have a life experience. We all have a perspective on life and what we call a life view or a view of the world. And we filter everything that happens to us or that we hear through that lens. So if we're raised in a certain way with certain values or in a certain culture, everything we interpret is through those lenses. And the importance of listening is that we learn very quickly that there are other worldviews, that our worldview is not the only view of the world. And that's where we start to understand things from different perspectives. And hence that importance of being able to reflect on that and say, okay, that doesn't mean that one person is right or the other one is wrong. It gives space to both. And it's the importance of being able to do that and get comfortable with it that allows the board to be very, very effective, because then it can discuss issues in a rather unemotive way and a more practical and functional way, and help the organization either set strategy, reinforce strategy, or resolve issues. So I think those are some of the important human characteristics that tend to ground as a starting point an individual on the board, and hence the dynamic that they end up contributing to, be it a positive one or an unhealthy one. And maybe I'll give an example of something in terms of what I've seen. So I've been on a number of boards, I think is Obi, you introduced a little bit earlier. And one of the things that I've seen is on boards that work very well, there's no ego, right? Everyone has an ego, but it gets checked at the door. The ego doesn't come into the board because every member on the board recognizes that they bring a particular perspective or a particular expertise. And it's the sum total of all of those individuals and all of those levels of expertise that make the board really effective. One person doesn't win the game, as they say. If you think about football, one player on the team cannot cause the team to win. One individual can contribute, but it takes the whole team to win the game. And I've also been on boards where I've seen the exact opposite, where I've seen individuals that perform or come at it as individuals, and they forget the purpose that they have around actually the importance is the collective. The importance is not the individual. And in those cases, you often see individuals that get very entrenched in their views and boards that have a hard time advancing or furthering issues. So those are just a couple of examples to help illustrate a little bit more what I mean. But that dynamic, I think, is the basic dynamic that every individual on a board needs to start with in order for them to be effective and the board ultimately as a collective to be effective. What are your views, Doc?
Thanks so much. The relationship here is also playing out. You actually led the good foundation. In my own, aligning with you, I say that though you can have structures, though you can have rules and a handbook, I think the trust, transparency, and accountability play a very significant role in board dynamics. When you have an open trust, you can engage openly. You are quite receptive to other people's idea without believing that you know it all. It creates that strong dynamics and leads in candor and accountability. We have had so many instances where in Nigeria, for instance, where rivalry because of relationship mar the board reputation instead of even harnessing. And that's where, when you talk about relationship, that counts a lot. In giving one illustration, depending on your mindset and your feeling about other board members, that could endanger the realization of the objective of the board. But if you, for instance, an analogy takes every person as an empty vessel. I have that. Let me just narrate that. There was this story of a vessel paddling, and another one was coming almost close to hitting the other vehicle and the other vessel, and this peddler was shouting, "Please, can you?" Until the other vessel came closer, he now realized that there was no person paddling the vessel. So that mindset, that thinking about another person, a lot of things can happen. Somebody can prefer suggestions or solutions without having any ulterior. But because of where you are coming from, you see that, and that Mars relationship, and any decision or any suggestion from the other board member creates issue. And in such a situation, we'll have reputational issue, we'll have trust will be eroded, and of course, the target and objective of the board will completely not be met. And that is why I still say it, how they relate, the dynamism, the chemistry, of course, the way they interact with each other becomes the invisible force that makes or tribes the board. So I completely align with you and I see it from that perspective. Thank you.
So that's a great insight, and I can see both of you are particular about the individual board member. What is your behavior? Like David said, the willingness to listen and being able to drop your ego when you enter the board, and being mindful of your responsibilities. And then the what Doctor just said about being receptive, and that's a very strong point, because when you don't have when you have a biased mind towards your fellow board members, that's already projecting negative energy. And I'm wondering, because you know the board is a collective, like you said, people with diverse traits and diverse attitudes. So how can one even address this kind of dynamics coming from the individual board members? I know this, we're just talking about one factor here. We're talking about the individuals. So how can you actually address this issue that when it's coming from different individuals? Do we actually have the control? Is there anything that can be done? Thank you, David. I think you want to speak, David.
It's another great question, and I think there are a few things. So what I would say, just I want to tack on to one thing you said a little bit earlier, Obi, when you were summarizing. When it comes to agendas or egos, I think it's important to recognize that everybody, or biases in particular, everybody has them. And I think part of the maturity is recognizing that there's a tendency for a bias and therefore being willing to challenge it for oneself within the context of the situation or the issue. So, and that's part of how you deal with individual dynamics. So when I've been in boards, if I take, and I'll give you an example, and this is a bit of an extreme example, but it illustrates the point really well. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and the friend was talking to me a little bit about an individual that they end up collaborating with. And the way that the individual was described was, look, this person has a voice that really I have a hard time hearing because they can't get past the voice, whether it's the pitch, the tone, the speed, whatever it happens to be. And I was helping my friend, talk through this particular issue. And I was challenging a little bit what he was thinking around the way he was reacting. And in challenging him, and of course, I did it in a way that wasn't accusatory or wasn't confrontational, it was more just asking questions. Well, have you thought about how the individual sees your voice? Oh, no, I never thought about that because my voice is kind of normal. So when you start to talk about how you relate to individuals, part of it is being willing to ask people questions. And this is what I do when I end up working with other individuals. I ask a lot of questions. And I ask these questions because I'm really interested in where they're coming from. And I'm really interested in what they think and why they think it. Because the more I understand about other members on the board, and Iheanyi and I did this when we first met many years ago now, and we were exchanging on digital reporting and sustainability in the regulatory environment, I really took the time to understand, what kinds of challenges do you see? What kinds of issues do you see? What kinds of questions do you get? And going in with that humility really helped the two of us connect very quickly. He did exactly the same thing. He's very similar to me in that respect. We're both very curious about other people. And that dynamic, really helps you create a bond through which you can deal with anything. You can literally deal with anything. So I know, for example, if I ended up having a real challenge, I could phone him up and say, listen, do you have a few minutes to talk so I can talk through this thing? And whatever the thing was, I know he would listen and I know he would help me think it through. without necessarily providing a solution, but through the approach that he would have, it would create a deepening of that relationship and a deepening of understanding. So when it comes to individual board members and conflict, the best thing you can do is don't try to change the other person. That is a recipe for disaster. You can never change someone. And I think, most people understand, for example, when you get married, the best advice you ever get is don't try to change your partner. It doesn't work because individuals are individuals. And it's true of men and women alike. It really doesn't make a difference. So what you try to do is that you adapt yourself to be able to communicate more effectively with the other person. So if we take responsibility ourselves for making sure that we understand where they're coming from and they understand where we're coming from, and we individually take that responsibility on, communication effectiveness and quality goes way up. And it's when one of the two individuals takes no responsibility that it becomes a very difficult situation. And clearly that needs to be dealt with. So I would say when there's an issue, one, do less talking and do more listening, ask questions and listen a bit more, and make sure that assumptions that we're making or views that we have aren't coming from a biased or prejudiced position, because it's innate in all of us. This is not unique to one individual, one gender, or one country. It's innately a human trait to have, but we need to challenge it. And we need to make sure that we're not taking those biases into that conversation and thereby damaging the conversation or damaging the relationship. And I think that's kind of the fundamental place to start. So it's, again, stop trying to change other people, because, as I said, that's a recipe for disaster, and really take responsibility for changing yourself and adapting yourself to improve communication as a starting point.
Yes, I like that. I like that thought, as in recognizing the tendency of bias. That's very huge, and that's a very key changer. Because when you recognize your bias, it will put you at the same level with the other person. I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect. So let's come together. And you also said taking that responsibility upon yourself, not waiting for when they'll create like board dinners and board outings, but taking that responsibility upon yourself to understand your fellow board member. That's very key. So I would like to